Are the Atlanta Falcons primed to win the NFC South for the first time since 2016? We're breaking down the dynamics of the roster today on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast.
You are Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes, your daily podcast for NFL and college football scouting. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's better than this? It's guys being dudes here on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. We're the Draft Dudes. I'm Joe Marino from Locked On Bills. He's Kyle Crabbs from Locked On Dolphins. And we are your NFL experts here with you daily to talk team building across the league on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with the Draft Dudes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to issue a big thank you, shout out, and welcome to our everydayers. Those of you who never miss a single episode, we appreciate y'all being here very, very much.
Happy hump day to you.
Thank you. Happy hump day.
Second half of the NFC South today, starting with the Atlanta Falcons. Tomorrow is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And one more division after this, the AFC South, so which means we have 6 more teams, including today, until we have done the full roster series, which I think is just in time. I believe the bootleg guys, EJ and Brett, I think they're starting their series like next week.
Oh, very good.
So we got a whole sampling of like league-wide stuff and then go do the bootleg version.
You didn't tease Friday, which is Takes on Takes.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
The reason I bring that up is I have something queued up specifically for you that I arrived at this morning.
What Takes on Takes?
Yeah, a take. Yeah,
Okay.
then I think it'll lead to a good conversation. So don't miss Friday, folks. I got a little something cooked up.
Very good.
Speaking of cooking up, the Atlanta Falcons are cooking up a new direction under Michael Penix as the quarterback of this football team. They showed some life there late in the season, man. A lot of guys really were productive, and obviously they're looking to parlay that into this coming year. And so, as Kyle said, the Falcons are the spotlight team today. We've went through and analyzed their roster, studied this team. We put every player into different buckets. Those buckets are roster cornerstone, quality starter, rookie, sufficient starter, replacement level, quality depth, non-roster caliber, incomplete evaluation, or a practice squad type player. Every bucket has a different numeric value associated with it. Every position is weighted differently based on importance. And so today we are going to show our work on the Atlanta Falcons. We'll talk about the back 7 on defense, the O-line and D-line, but we start with the offensive skill players around Michael Penix.
Yeah, it's nice to see Bijan Robinson be the player you thought he could be last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, not that I was nervous about it, but you knew he was special, and we got a chance to see that in full last year.
I got triggered all over again to think about how he nearly had a 50-50 carry split with Tyler Algier.
Boy, we're 30 seconds into really talking Falcons, and Kyle already bringing in Tyler
hammering
Algier.
Arthur Smith, man. He averaged a full yard per carry less and got 186 carries. Bijan Robinson.
Algier still has a role. They got both these backs going in a meaningful way last year.
Yes. But you know what they didn't have? A 50-50 carry split.
No.
You get 305 for Bijan Robinson and 137 for Tyler Algier. That's much more proportionate. And lo and behold, you use Tyler Algier in the role that he's better suited for, and he averaged a full yard per carry more in 2024 than he did in 2023 when it was way too much of non-hammer, meat, nail type situations.
Falcons had 6 players last year with over 600 yards from scrimmage. I think that's probably the most of any team in the league. Would you guess that?
No.
You think another team had more?
Well, part of the problem is their 7th had 137 and then 46, 32, 17. So
yeah, but 6 over 600, 3 over 900.
How many yards from scrimmage? 600?
602. Kyle Pitts had 602. Algier 732. Ray McLeod 765. Mooney 992. Drake London 1268, and Bijan 1,887.
You know how many Buffalo Bills had more than 600 yards from scrimmage last year?
2, maybe 3.
There was 3. It was James Cook, Khalil Shakir, and Ray Davis. That was it.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Felt like a healthy number for an everybody eats team. What about the Packers? They're everybody eats, right? Talk about a segment here. We are off the rails.
No, not necessarily. It's spotlighting the balance, which you would expect to get for a team that drafts Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan Robinson all in the top 10, right? You're going to be expected to. Green Bay had 5.
All right. So
it was Josh Jacobs, 1671, Jaden Reed, 1020, Tucker Kraft, 713, Christian Watson, 643, Romeo Dobbs, 601, Emmanuel Wilson, 550, Dontavian Wicks, 415, Chris Brooks, 252.
All right.
And then newly found cornerback Bo Melton, 140.
Yes. These are Kyle's trigger points this summer are well established. Here, speaking of well established, all of those players that had 600 yards or more from scrimmage are all back. And I think,
the Kyle Pitts trade rumors.
We'll see. Yeah, here's the thing about Kyle Pitts. You have to separate Kyle Pitts from being a top 5 pick and the player he was selected over, right? Because he's a player that, 600 yards receiving for a tight end in the NFL is pretty good production. It's not like he's not a productive, reasonable player. It's just that he's not a player that's delivering on a top 5 draft selection and going over the likes of Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle and all the guys he was picked over.
Well, and part of that problem is that first season was 1,000-yard season for Kyle Pitts.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. So it only added more fuel to the fire of really transcendent special talent and look, let's be fair. He had a pretty significant injury and missed some time in the meat of this rookie contract. And really feels like he's just now getting his feet fully back underneath of him. I do think he's a player that probably benefits more from maybe being a split end at times as compared to a traditional Y. He's grown some in that regard since he came in the league, but that's never just going to be his strengths. And I think that's what makes him, out of all of the names that are kind of in the top buckets for Atlanta, I feel really good about Bijan Robinson being a cornerstone. I think Drake London's a cornerstone. I think Darnell Mooney's a sufficient level starter, but a good wide receiver too. Tyler Algier, I feel good about quality depth. Kyle Pitts is the one that you just can't quite fully forget what the potential is, and it makes it hard to bucket him versus some of the other guys that they have in their offense. I
agree, but I think if you look at this group collectively and feel like, what does Zach Robinson, the OC, and Michael Penix have at his disposal to attack a defense, I think you feel pretty good about it. Where I think Drake London, we 1,300 yards last year. Really, the 2 games with Penix down the stretch were unbelievable. Yeah. Should be very excited about that as a true number 1. Mooney as the field stretching number 2, I thought was terrific for this team. You were kind of reminded of some of the hype that he had earlier in his career. Kyle Pitts is a player that presents some matchup problems. Maybe he's not everything everyone wanted him to be, but he's still a good player. Bijan's a top-tier NFL running back. They've got great depth in Algier. McLeod is a kind of shifty slot guy in the slot. It's a good group, man. I don't look at this and crave more. I think that this offense has what it needs to be successful. And of course, they have to me, a top-tier offensive line as well to bring this whole thing together.
A little worried about the depth for the pass catchers.
Of course I am.
That's the thing for me that you said I'm not wanting of more. And if you had another, whether it was a tight end 2 that you felt like could give you contributions in the passing game, and Warner's a fine player, but he's an inline wide tight end that's a low ceiling player. But if Drake London were to miss time, heaven forbid, I think the entire complexity of the pass catching unit shifts pretty dramatically. So that's the one thing for me that as I look at it and I see who the depth players are, what I think their roles can and should be, this has the foundations of a top, off the top of my head, 8 supporting cast for a quarterback in the NFL.
If everyone's healthy. Yeah.
But the interruption, if there's an interruption with one of the cornerstone players, I think it would be felt more than some of the deeper groups that exist.
Of those 6 players to have 600 yards or more from scrimmage, they all played 17 games except for Darnell Mooney, who played 16. So that health was on point last year. And for Atlanta, certainly hope it's on point again this year. All right, I kind of said I like this Falcons offensive line. We'll see if Kyle agrees. And Also start talking about the defensive line, where we know that's a big topic for Atlanta. We'll do all that and more on the other side of it. Folks, be sure to stick with us. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average, in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options haven't worked, Rugiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. All right, so we're talking O-line, D-line here, Atlanta Falcons, and this is a really stable group for the offensive line. I mean, you've got the ultimate Iron Man there at left tackle and Jake Matthews, who continues to play at a quality level. I love how Matthew Bergeron has developed in at left guard. I think he's knocking on the door of being a quality starter if he's not already. Got a little transition here at center with Drew Dahlman gone, but Ryan Newsel got a lot of opportunity to play last year, and I think gave them the confidence to let Drew Dahlman walk in free agency. I think they feel good about that succession plan. Chris Lindstrom's maybe the best right guard in the NFL. And then Caleb McGarry's been a stable player at right tackle, who I think is a sufficient level starter, where Lindstrom's a cornerstone. You pair that with some experienced depth in Storm Norton and Elijah Wilkinson. You add Jack Nelson in the draft. A couple of other interior players in Gwynn and Hinton that I think have some level of upside. And I think the starting group here is really good, and they've got some appealing depth relative to it being depth. I like the makeup of this offensive line.
Yeah, Newsel signed a 2-year contract worth close to $10 million.
Yeah.
I think he just signed that, but it was announced like at the end of May. So it's a pretty good vote of confidence for him to step in place of Drew Dahlman. And you mentioned the other 4 established starters. I have Jake Matthews as a cornerstone player. It's a very easy decision to make. It's a fine wine player, right? We almost need like a collection and then have like put the faces on the wine bottles up on the top shelf for like top shelf fine wine. These guys that just keep getting better. And I've made the analogy like 5-6 times in the past 2 weeks, but Matthews is another one of those guys who top blank pass protector in football. Sorry to make you do the thing, but
I'm sure.
Is it a
10.
single digit?
I'm sure it's probably 10. Yeah.
He's in the single digits, probably. If he's not, he's number 10. Loved your call out for Bergeron. I actually had him as a quality starter. I don't know if that's too hot of a take for you.
I was wanting to do it. I was looking for some confidence. I was a big fan coming out, and I think year 2 he came into his own at left guard.
Let's say it with our chest, right? Lindstrom cornerstone, Caleb McGarry. I think it was 2 years ago we had him nailed down as a quality starter. I don't think he's played the best football of his career, but he's a high floor player, and he's a good fit for obviously, him and Lindstrom came in the same draft class in the first round. So they have a lot of chemistry together. So I love your call outs there for that. So I have cornerstone quality starter. Newsel, what'd you grade him?
I gave him sufficient starter.
Okay. I had incomplete evaluation with a lean towards a sufficient level starter. And then Lindstrom cornerstone and McGarry sufficient level starter. I would not sleep on Joshua Gray, undrafted free agent out of Oregon State. Not the biggest guy. He was an older rookie, so 25 years old, kind of had a roundabout way, but the athletic profile, when you look at what this group has had success with, he's played tackle in his college career. I think he's a guard exclusive player at the next level with maybe some center upside. He's not a very long player, but him coming into this group and battling names like Wynn and Hinton and Wilkinson, I think there's some upside there with Joshua Gray. Would not be surprised if he surprises and maybe he doesn't make the 53 this year, but at some point, if you told me that he ends up earning an opportunity to be a util player for them as a depth player, I'd totally buy it right now based off of what the film was at Oregon State.
All right, let's shift gears to the defensive side of the football, focusing on the trenches. And
a lot of unknown here, Joseph Marino.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think the one thing you do know is David Onyemata, who continues to be a good player at one spot. And then
I had him as a sufficient level starter.
That's what I have him as well. Yeah. Then it's, what do we get out of Rook Ororhoro in year 2? It was a pretty high pick, a lot of athleticism. We knew it would take a little time, but the stage is set for him to have some impact here. Then you have Morgan Fox, who I think has been a good depth player for a long time in the NFL. That'll get some snaps here. Zach Harrison, who I think has kind of proven himself as a quality depth player. What's the ceiling there, right? Maybe there's more to unlock. I think so, right? He's got all the tools. He's still young. Got to see what we have in Brandon Dorless, who's an incomplete evaluation. Taquan Graham, I think, has kind of established himself as a quality depth player. We'll see what more there is to unlock there. So that's kind of your hand in the dirt players that you would expect to line up from the 0 to the 5 tech. And, you know, obviously it's getting a little bit strange without Grady Jarrett in this mix. He's been such a mainstay for so long here, but there is some developing young talent. There is some established veteran talent. I'm curious to see how the veteran talent holds up in terms of, I think Morgan Fox and David Onyemata are defined players in the league that aren't getting better. So, like, hopefully there's not some decline there. But how much do we get out of these younger players that we're still learning about? I think that's going to define a lot of this defense.
Raheem Morris and Jeff Ulbrich, you need to flex your muscles with this group. I think there's a lot of potential here with this group, but the proven commodities beyond Onyemata and Fox, as you said, it's guys that haven't established themselves as marquee players, as starters, and you feel good about guys on a 300 to 400 snap rotational basis, and then you got some young guys that were top 4-round investments from last year's NFL draft. And obviously the athletic profile of Rook was so promising at Clemson. It just the light bulb never came on for the leap in play to happen in college. And you're hoping now repeat, same system, elevated opportunity, unbelievable physical gifts that you can pull that out of them.
You ever seen a collection of pass rushers like this off the edge? Just a bunch of 250 pounders that are long and bursty and bendy, but
yeah, Atlanta every year for forever.
Boy, and we tripled down on that, quadrupled down. Leonard Floyd they bring over, who I think he wakes up and has 8+ sacks every single year. We'll see. It's his age 33 season. Arnold Ebiketie, I think, is a guy that you'd love as like your third pass rusher.
And I think he can be in that spot in this room.
Jalen Walker, who they fell into in the draft, I thought he'd go a little higher. I'm curious to see how they deploy him. Last year with Caden Ellis rushed a bunch last year. Does Walker get those opportunities? Does Ellis still get those opportunities? How do they deploy that? I think that'll be fun to see how that goes. James Pierce, who they've committed a lot to, right? They traded next year's first-round pick to get him. Another one of those speed, bursty guys. And then like Braylon Trice, D'Angelo Malone, who, I mean, I'm not sure where the snaps come from, especially from Malone, who I think has been disappointing. Trice is a second-year player, but did he even play? I don't think he played as
he had an injury.
Yeah, which has been this kind of story of his career to this point. So I think it's a Floyd, Walker, Ebiketie, Pierce conversation. Obviously, a lot of ceiling there. You feel like there's a floor with Floyd, but the conversation with Atlanta and sack production is not going to go away until Atlanta produces sacks at a level that's not bottom of the league like it's been for the last 20 years.
The edge rush room feels very Jeff Ulbrich to me with what it was in New York with Robert Saleh and like how they had all the depth at that spot, you know, and the Will McDonald investment, and that surprised a little bit, but they really craved and were hungry for that kind of wave after wave of guys. And that's the thing for me as I sit here and I look at this group and I ask myself, how many of these guys can we get on the field at the same time? And pretty much every permutation that you have for front potential, one of the edge guys is off. And it's like, I don't think we're going to live in a world where Ebiketie, Pierce, Floyd, Walker, Dorless / Rook as an interior player, and then Onyemata are all on the field. Like it's just there's not enough spots on the front, which speaks to a team that has had pass rush problems, Joe, for forever.
Yeah.
You know, as Ebiketie led the team in sacks last year with 6, and then it was Judon, who's still looking for his next spot, and he had 5.5. And Judon was supposed to be the big fix.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't happen, and they kind of struggled defensively. I think the Falcons finished last year as far as points allowed in top 10 in franchise history with 423. And obviously there's 17 games, and that doesn't help that profile, but they finished 23rd in the league in points allowed and 23rd in the league in yards, and they were 23rd in the league in turnovers. Their plus minus in points, they were 19th. Their net, and that's obviously out of 32 teams. They were much better represented in yards, but not a surprise when you look at the draft class, and we'll get into the back 7 here in just a minute, and see investments in the mid rounds with defensive backs and potentially making a splash somewhere else to add even more. They're invested in getting this group right for Raheem Morris.
I smell a lot of simulated pressures coming for this team based on the makeup of this edge group. All right, it'll be a question until it's not. We're going to focus in on the back 7 on defense here. Some intriguing possibilities there. We'll break it down here for you next. Be sure to stick with us. You ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just another budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. Folks, the insights are surprising. When I first started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and I save more. Plus, the all-in-one convenience is awesome. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can just use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and plan for your long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year.
So the back 7. You mentioned Caden Ellis. I love the addition of Divine Diablo in free agency to kind of go with Bertrand as a young player, Troy Anderson, Caden Ellis. You have Jalen Walker that can play off the ball a little bit. D'Angelo Malone can play off the ball a little bit. You get a lot of names here, and it gives you a lot of ambiguity for guys that can kind of blur the lines. Diablo, is he playing some safety type assignments because it used to be a safety?
Playing the overhang for sure, right?
Ellis can pressure. Walker can pressure. Malone can pressure. Anderson was won the FCS like player of the year at 3 different spots during his college career at Montana State. So they got a lot of versatility on the second level of this group. That's what stands out to me first and foremost.
You might be able to look at this front collectively, like backers, edge rushers, down linemen, and say it might be the most versatile group in the league, which creates a lot of intriguing options for how they can play, and different players they can rush, different players they can drop. There's a lot of options there, and I do think Divine Diablo is a good addition to Give them a matchup type player that can play in space and maybe in some ways that you don't project from some of the other players that are more pressure players, downhill type guys. I gave Ellis a quality starter label. I gave Divine Diablo a sufficient level starter label.
Yep. Same page on those two.
Let's go to safety. Jesse Bates, cornerstone player. Unbelievable signing. Continues to be a consistent big play guy that I might have a case for being probably is the best player on this defense. They signed Jordan Fuller, who didn't really work out in Carolina last year, but Raheem had him in LA, right? I would assume there's some carryover there where there's some familiarity to use him. Xavier Watts, a draft pick that I know both you and I really like. We had him graded much higher than he was drafted. And then go back to 2023, and DeMarco Hellams had some promise after his rookie season or during his rookie season. So I like the makeup of this safety group. And I think between Fuller and Watts, I think you'll get your running mate to go with Bates. So I think this is a pretty stable situation.
And then Billy Bowman is a 4th-round draft choice too, who played a lot on the roof at Oklahoma, has great ball skills, a really scrappy player. He's just not particularly big. And as a result, there's some tackle challenges there where maybe that's not a player you want to live on the back end relative to what Fuller can be as a tackler and what Bates has proven as an all-around player. I think that's the thing for both Watts and Bowman is the new additions via the draft. And this team made 5 picks and 4 of them, the first 4 came on defense in the first 4 rounds. So they very clearly wanted the safety room and the edge rush room to be remade as essential pieces, and having a veteran in Fuller that's played in the scheme, I think is a nice step. And then you get skill sets in Watts who can play in the high post and maybe learn to be an heir for Jesse Bates down the road or complement him depending on how you want to implement Bates. And Bowman can play some nickel. Bowman can play free safety. He can play split field coverages, obviously. Where do you feel most comfortable getting the ball skills on the field and circumvent the tackle challenges that have kind of littered throughout the course of his college career? That gives you, much like we talked about with the front, a lot of options to find combinations. And it's putting the responsibility on the coaching staff to find the right buttons to push and the right combinations of players. But I don't look at this group and say that they don't have the talent necessary to be an impactful unit.
Yeah, I think it could be really strong, especially if the rush in the front can deliver this year. Corner, AJ Terrell, we're still doing our thing. I have him as a quality starter, and they kind of rolled the dice last year on Mike Hughes. And I think Mike Hughes held his head above water. They're counting on him again this year, where your third corner is really Clark Phillips. So I think there's some limitations there in terms of size. He's a scrappy, competitive player, but I don't think you want him in an every down role. Your only other corner that of note is Mike Ford, who's a great special teams player, but not a guy that throughout his long NFL career has been asked to play a lot of snaps on defense. So we need AJ Terrell to stay healthy. We need Mike Hughes to at least be the player he was last year, and hope that we don't have to put Clark Phillips on the field too much. I mean, maybe he can help in the slot. I think D. Elford will probably be the primary option in the slot. He's a young player that I think entering year 4, I think he's built year over year some progression there to kind of be the answer. And maybe that's where Clark Phillips can kind of challenge. But I think this corner room is okay if everyone's healthy. I do find myself concerned if we have to tap into this depth.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if they're a team that wants to get involved a little bit with the stagnant corner market that we're still waiting on, because I view it much like I view the perimeter play on the offensive side of the ball for Atlanta, where if you tell me you're going to get everybody full bore, I say, okay, like we can make this group work. But how often does it happen? And how often does it happen with both sides of the ball with your perimeter players? So the good news for Atlanta is I think they have options. But I also look at the defensive side of the ball with Bates as a cornerstone. I have Terrell as a cornerstone. The quality starters that I have down for Caden Ellis, I think Leonard Floyd teeters back and forth between being a sufficient level starter and a quality starter. I think they have pieces that can allow you to tie your identity to a handful of players, right? Because who are your cornerstones and how consistent are they is a big piece of the puzzle. And I think that's what the secondary, amidst all of the options that they have, has to tie themselves to. Well, we have Bates and we have Terrell, and we know what those two guys are.
Well, I think how the team emerged throughout the season last year, I think gives you some hope for how everyone settles into their roles in year two. I think it took a little time with a pretty big turnover with their coaching staff. Obviously, it was completely turned upside down. And I thought you could look across the board and feel like a lot of these guys just played better and better throughout the course of the year. And so a full off season in the system with a year under their belt, I think it'll go a long way. And the consistency that you're talking about being more prevalent for the guys that are relying on most. So I think, if I'm a Falcons fan, I'm clinging to everything that happened late in the year for year one of a coaching staff. And that's where my excitement comes from.
Yeah. And then obviously you have the Michael Penix layer to this that we didn't really get into, because quarterbacks are their own thing in this exercise that we do. But this team's been teetering on the brink with the ghost of Kirk Cousins, with Desmond Ridder, who's flirting with retirement, it sounds like, and Taylor Heineke, and Penix coming in and being rough around the edges, but getting a little sampling of playing time could be a really exciting catalyst for them. Yeah. And if they put yards and points on the board, that's going to allow this pass rush room that they've invested in to really shine. And that's where I think you have to get excited after what they had a couple of brutal losses at the end of the year, with the loss in overtime to Washington to go to 8-8.
Yeah.
They were still in it, if I remember correctly, with that overtime game as far as the South. It's a matter of stacking the progress from the end of last year, even though you had that poor taste in your mouth with how those last two games went.
Yeah. So that's Falcons.
That is the Atlanta Falcons. That is going to do it for us here today on Locked On NFL Scouting. The Bucks, the crew, coming your way tomorrow. We hope you'll come back and see us. Kyle Crabbs, Joe Marino. We're out of here. Talk to y'all again soon.